Welcome to Change by Attraction, because you don't have to push, prod, persuade, or punish people to create change in your organization. I'm your host, Esther Derby. In the first episode of this podcast, I talked about how the words we use can really influence the way we think about change and what our expectations for change are. In that episode, called The Language of Change, I focused on metaphors. But today, I want to talk about just one word: resistance. That term and its variants, resistors, resisting, resistant, causes a boatload of problems. I followed an online discussion about change where this guy, a consultant, was complaining that his ideas weren't getting much traction in the organization where he was working. And he blamed it on the old timers who were resistant to new ideas and resistant to change. But I actually get why people who've been with a company for a long time might not be so open to the advice of a newcomer or an outsider. I actually think it's quite an understandable response and even a reasonable response. I prefer to think of it as those people responded. They didn't resist. They responded to his ideas and the changes he was proposing. And that response is chock full of valuable information because they know stuff that the outsider didn't, but he might need to know. And that information may relate to the timing of the change. It may relate to local conditions. It may relate to internal politics or side effects that people see from their knowledge of the system that might not be obvious to someone from the outside. And these are all super valuable things to learn about. However, once their response gets labeled as resistance, the chance of learning any of that goes way down. Even if someone keeps trying to get the information across, it's likely that it will be received as complaining, arguing. They've already been written off. So anything they say is just looked at as an excuse. Once someone gets tagged with the label resistor, or their behavior gets tagged as resistance, the impulse is to push. You have to push them harder to get them to change. But the thing is, when people feel pushed, they aren't as likely to cooperate. Between cutting off a source of information and cutting off a source of potential cooperation and creativity, making change has just gotten harder. So I'm troubled by the impact of that word, but I'm also troubled by the assumptions behind the term resistance. When I hear people talk about other people as resistors or resisting, there's usually two cases. One is where people are viewed as too self-interested or too selfish or too stupid to want to embrace new ideas. And the other is when people lower in the hierarchy don't comply. And that's the first big assumption, that people who are told to change should do as they're told, without asking questions, without questioning why, without understanding. They're just supposed to do as they're told. Which is sort of ironic because companies go to great efforts to hire smart, well-educated, capable people, and then in certain cases expect compliance from them. And that goes against everything that leaders say they want in organizations. They say they want engagement and creativity, they want innovation, but you can't have that and have compliance. So if you want to bring some creativity to your change, you have to get rid of that assumption that people should just do as they're told. The second assumption is that the person who's resisting is wrong. They're not a team player, they don't see the big picture, they don't get it. They're just plain wrong, recalcitrant. Even asking questions gets labeled as resistance. But people's questions may be a genuine effort to translate the new idea into their existing cognitive framework. It could be a sign they're actually trying really hard to incorporate the new idea. Their questions often show where they expect to see roadblocks. And they may be testing the idea against organizational constraints that they know from their perspective would make it very difficult to achieve the desired and intended benefit. I met a trainer once who was really distressed that her students were asking her questions during her Scrum class because she wanted them to drink the Kool-Aid. Not ask questions, just accept her truth. That's for cult members. For people who've given up their own initiative and their own will and follow without engaging their brains. And that's not the kind of person that companies say they want to hire. The flip side of that assumption, the third assumption, is that the people who are pushing for a change are right. That they understand everything they need to know and they have designed it and all is wonderful and well. So here's a case of a manager who thought he knew exactly what to do. And actually his idea wasn't a bad one, but his implementation was kind of a mess. He attended a 2-day Scrum class, and coming back from that, he decided that his development department should have a single work queue. And that all of the developers should, when they finish something, they should just pull the next thing in the queue and work on that. And on some level, I think pull systems can be quite wonderful. But the problem was that there were something like 300 code modules, and each developer specialized in a handful of them. So if he finished his work or she finished her work and pulled the next thing from the queue and it was something they knew nothing about, they would have to go ask questions. It would take them a lot of time to figure out what was going on. In the meanwhile, they'd be interrupting other people. So it was actually just a big mess. It didn't improve flow, as the manager had hoped. It created chaos. Now, I think there is a way that he could have been successful with that idea had he respected the knowledge of the developers in that group and talked to them about what areas of the product they knew and how could they expand their knowledge, or how could they iterate towards a situation where they had a queue where it could be a pull queue, rather than just dumping it on people in, one big event. Which leads me to a little sidebar. I find it really interesting that so many organizations that say they want to take on agile methods, adopt agile methods, do it in a very sequential way. They do big upfront planning, they roll it out, they do not iterate and learn as they go. They are not changing to agile in an agile manner. They're changing to agile in a big design upfront, roll it out in one big release manner. End of sidebar. So when you see that someone isn't taking up a new idea with great enthusiasm, recognize that they may have valid questions. They may even have valid reasons for not wanting to pursue the idea. Think of it as a response, and then turn your curiosity back on. The person coming in with a new idea knows stuff that the people who are being asked to change don't know. That's just a fact. But the reverse is also true. That the people who have been working on the teams, or the people who've been in a company for a long time, know stuff that no outsider or newcomer could possibly know. They know history, context, personalities, politics. They know what's been tried before and why it didn't work, and what's different that might help it work this time, or what tweaks might be necessary to get it to work. In addition to having different sets of knowledge, there's stuff that's just not known. Some of it's about how the change is going to play out in a particular context, but it also has to do with, do the people involved, does the system involved have the capability and the capacity to actually absorb the change, whether it be from a knowledge-based standpoint or whether it be from just they're overwhelmed with other work. On the flip side of that, the people who are being asked to change don't initially know that the person who's coming in with this idea understands their context, or understands the nature of the change, or understands the nature of their work. So unless you come in with a big reputation, there's really not a lot of reason for people to just blindly accept what's being told to them. Sometimes, because of prior changes, people have legitimate reason to be skeptical. I think it's useful to consider the possibility that your advice may not fit the context. It might just not work there. I have a friend who's a nurse on a cardiac unit, and her hospital brought in a bunch of outside experts, efficiency experts. And one of their ideas was to implement flexible staffing, which in their minds meant that any nurse could be assigned to any unit. Now, in a crisis situation, a capacity crisis situation, I think having a nurse with nurses training, which will apply across a broad number of situations, is probably better than having no nurse. But I don't really want, the mental health nurse doing my cardiac procedure. I'd rather have someone who has the specific expertise to do that. The nurses who brought up these questions and these concerns, though, were, oddly enough, labeled as resistors. In the previous episode, The Fingerprint Principle, I talked about involving people upfront in a change, involve them defining the problem, refining designs, and really being an integral part of evolving the change to fit local situations. That's sort of an insurance policy against resistance. But in many formal change methods, they actually have a core part of it as a plan to overcome resistance. And the irony is that the way they go about the change is often what engenders the resistance. Because people don't actually resist change, they resist being pushed, they resist being changed, they resist being told what to do and not having their expertise and their knowledge respected. So the next time the term resistance floats into your mind, stop. Replace it with, why are they responding that way? There might be something I need to learn here. Then get your curiosity going. What do they know that might be useful to you? How can you listen to them in a way that will make it likely that they are going to be interested in hearing what you have to say? Allow yourself to be influenced by them so that you have a possibility of influencing in return. Chances are you'll learn something really useful, and you may even discover an ally. The truth about resistance is that the behavior that gets labeled as resistance is usually just people not embracing a change with the speed or enthusiasm desired. And people have legitimate reasons for that. Your job is to find out what they are. If you enjoyed this podcast or you're curious about some of the ideas in it, I'd love if you drop me an email, esther@estherderby.com. Thanks for listening. You'll find references and links mentioned in the episode at changebyattraction.simplecast.com. Check out my website and blog at www.estherderby.com. You'll find lots of articles about change, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. If you enjoyed the podcast, please let your friends know and rate it on Simplecast or wherever you get your podcasts.